This has been a really amazing opportunity to see this project come to life for me. This is the first time that I've had it in a space where I can be in the space with other people in person and talk about it. So I've been doing presentations and also sort of window installations and exhibitions since last October. This is the first sort of traditional space that I've been able to do this in. So the project, Thousand Moons, is an art installation and ongoing grief process. As Karen said, I lost my grandparents to COVID in January and February 2021. And this has been sort of what I've been doing to work with it, with grief, I suppose, in response, and just what I can do to process. And it's become something that I really felt that I wanted to share as my art practice, or not that I wanted to share. I didn't feel like there was anything else I really could share that was meaningful to me. So this has been what has become my focus really for the last year or so. So tonight I'm going to be talking about a walkthrough of this particular exhibit and sort of the meanings as you see the pieces that are here in person. And I also just returned from an artist residency 3 miles from my grandparents' home in Maine. So I'll be sharing some video. I took this installation there. This is the picture, is me in Maine, and just my experience there at Haystack School of Crafts. So when you enter this building, you can see the moon's actually on the second floor in the windows, and the sun shines right through those windows in the morning and really changes throughout the day, the way the installation feels from morning to night. And that sort of cycle is the sort of natural cycles, and the way that the work changes through time is something that was really central to me in this work in general, not just in this space. So having it in this particular space, that part of it was a really, really strong part of this installation for me. And that the cycles of time, the natural cycles of day and night, cycles of the tides, cycles of the months, the seasons, is something that I really turn to as a way to recenter myself in time, and as sort of a healing process of just focusing on the way that things change and come back again in nature. Every night there's a morning, every morning there's a night. Tides go out, they come back in. And there, especially shortly after my grandparents died, there wasn't a lot that I felt I could hold on to. And that sort of natural cycle became a really important aspect of that for me. So seeing it here with the light changing throughout the day has been really cool. And every place I show it, there's some different interaction with the environment. And that's something that I always really love in my installation work, but this piece in particular, the way it sort of responds to the space that it's in and the people who are around it. So if you came up the stairs, this is the first wall. If you came up the elevator, it's the second wall. But this is sort of this is the first exhibit that I've displayed sort of chronologically that is in the order that I created the work. So this wall is the early work, and this is 112 moons, so 9 years. And this paper, the moons are all made with paper that I had made years ago. Before I moved to Oregon, I came from Hawaii, and I had made the paper in Hawaii with materials from there. And they were big sheets, 16 by 20 sheets. And I had it for years, just the paper with the pieces of natural materials in it. And after my grandparents died, I cut it all apart into these moons. And at the time, I really, the feeling I had was I just needed to tear something apart. And it doesn't really look like a destructive process. I mean, they're very carefully cut, but that was the feeling that I was working with at the time. But this was something that I had for a long time, and it was ready to be something else. So this is the first 6 months of 2021 was when I was doing this. And This is also the same time that American news media started to acknowledge rising violence against Asian Americans, and just the sort of blind fear and misguided hatred about COVID that lashed out in that direction. First 6 months of 2021 was also the time when we started to get a lot of politicizing about COVID safety, and trying to mourn my grandparents through that, it really has been impossible for me to describe or share. And that is part of the reason I'm doing this project, because it's not, it's visual, it's emotional, and it's not something that I am able to or need to quantify in words. So that's one of the reasons that this work has been important to me. Doing the talks has been good for me and interesting too, because it's an opportunity for me to try to put some of that into words, um, alongside the work. Um, so A Thousand Moons is about my grandparents who died of COVID. I am mixed race, Chinese American. My grandparents who died of COVID were not Chinese, but I am, and that's been sort of a strange space for me. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But as part of my grief process working with this, I have started really exploring my own Chinese side of my heritage on the other side of my family. So there are two poems in the exhibit. And again, that's not something I normally share. I write occasionally, but I don't usually include that as part of my public work. But the one on this wall I wrote shortly after my grandmother died. I will read it out loud. I will find you in the earth, in the smell of trees, in a wildness that could never be tamed. I will find you in a lifetime of these gifts. The silence of fog, the joy of a bird, forgiveness, and a thoughtful mind. So this is the Hawaii paper, most of which I cut into moons in between the time when my grandmother and my grandfather died, which is about 4 weeks apart. This wall is less than 1/10 of the total number of full moons in my grandmother's life. So just the volume of months of moons of time has been something that I've been really interested in showing visually. What does that look like? I guess as an artist, and it's a question we ask a lot, like whatever the idea is that we have, what does that look like? So this idea of showing time in space has been central to this exhibit. And then the last thing on this wall is 3 sheets of paper from the first new batch of paper I made in summer of 2021. So I finished cutting all the moons apart from the paper I already had, and I knew I wanted to finish the 1,000, which I'm still working on. I'm not done yet, but I needed to make new paper. So this paper I made after their deaths using materials from their home place. So this is kelp from the shoreline where they lived, sheet music from their library. And those were the 2 primary materials that I worked with in this first batch of paper that I made over summer in 2021. So each one of these moons is cut out from this paper that I made is unique. And each one really feels precious to me when I work with this installation, putting the strands up on the walls, taking photographs of it or video. I really enjoy looking at each one of them and seeing how they're different, and thinking about, like every one of these represents a month in time, and how in our own lives, the lives of the people we love, every month of our lives is different, and it adds up to who we are. Who the people we love are, what our memories of them look like. I work a lot with abundance and multiples. That's something that is reflected here. But I realized when I was doing this project that a lot of the abundance work that I do and the work with multiples is sort of a celebration of life in this way. That every one of the 1,100 objects is unique and beautiful. And it's something that I I often turn to in response to crisis. I do work with ocean pollution as well, and I use the same sort of abundance and multiples as a celebration of life and uniqueness and beauty. So this is a close-up of one of the sheets. You can see the seaweed, the kelp, and the sheet music before I cut the sheet apart. And once I made these sheets, I really fell in love with them just as they were before I cut them apart. So I made more sheets of paper than I need, and I'm going to keep them. So it was nice to see some of them in the exhibit. Some of the sheets in this exhibit will be cut apart into moons to finish the 1100, but not all of them. So this is the second viewing area that's sort of separated by that open corridor from the first viewing area. And this area has 517 moons, which is 41 years. So the total of this physical exhibition is 629 moons or 50 years. So it's about halfway, a little more than halfway. And just, standing in the space and thinking about like, what is it going to look like when there's twice as many? Or, standing in this particular space and thinking this is 41 years, what does that look like in relation to your own life? How much of your own life that is. And I've been sharing this since the beginning of, well, not since the very beginning, but since early on in making them when I had a lot less done. And the point of that is that it's a process-based project. This is not something that I am, eventually I will make 1175, but the point is not that I'm finishing it, but that grief is a process. This project is a process, and that is the value of it. In this space in particular, I'm just realizing if I get really close to the mic, that it actually works. I don't know if you've all been able to barely hear me this time or not, but I'll try and stay close. So in this space in particular, there's a lot of different detail elements. So I'm going to go through them basically from left to right. And these are also loosely chronological. So this is one of the full sheets of paper, close up, that I wrote just stream of consciousness memories on last Thanksgiving, which was the first sort of milestone date since my grandparents' deaths. That was like a series of milestone dates. Thanksgiving, Christmas, they both died in winter. Both of their birthdays are in winter. So it was just like a series of dates it was the first year for all of those. And I didn't realize how difficult that was going to be. And that was another point where I've talked about this in previous presentations. There's not a lot of space that I found in American culture for the process of grief, the ongoing process, and what does that first year look like, those year milestones. So I didn't really expect it, to be honest. But it was something that was really, it was a lot of dates, one after the other. And this was one of the things I did in response, not really realizing that that's what I was doing, but looking back and sort of thinking about when did this happen? When did I do what? This is one of the things that I did to just sort of try and respond to that time. So after I wrote all the memories, I cut them up into circles. And those are hanging in the window wall here at the Reser. And you can, read a little bit, but they're fragmented. And I knew I was going to do that when I wrote the sheet. So this is an image actually from my studio, but it just gives you an idea of more of the sheets of paper. In the windows, the moons are cut out from sheets of paper from my first batch last summer. I made a second batch of paper in February of this year, so pretty recently, and that's these sheets of paper. I added more elements, my grandfather's favorite tea, which I discovered makes a beautiful stain on the back of the sheets of paper. Third from the left on the bottom is the back of a sheet. Daylily leaves from my grandmother's garden. Just some more sort of memory elements. And that was made right around the end time of that tough winter of first year dates. So the memory page was at the beginning of that, and then I made all of this paper sort of at the end of that time. And again, I didn't really like plan it out that way. It just sort of looking back on it, like that is what happened. And that's been interesting for me to have. Like I take photos, all my photos have a date stamp on them. And then when I look back, I'm like, oh, I see now. Months later, like I can see what was happening, but I don't, I do what I do at the time. And when I feel like I'm ready to might make progress on this project, then I do. But it's been a very organic process for me, of just like I have things I need to do by a certain date. Like I had to get the show up by a certain date, but it it was very much for me like this is going to be where I am right now in my process of making this project, in my process of grieving. So I don't know, like what's going to come out of it exactly because it's going to be where I am. And just honoring that process and letting myself be where I am with it has been something that's been really helpful for me. And again, I think something that isn't maybe necessarily a focus in our culture. So 4 of these sheets of paper from the second batch are on the near gallery wall. This is a close up of one of the sheets with the tea and the daylily leaves. And I really love how it looks. I like the paper. And that's been nice to work with a project that's this heavy, but I enjoy visually and just like physically experiencing it. I enjoy making the paper, getting my hands into it. I enjoy doing the stringing of the moons. I enjoy cutting them out, and I enjoy looking at it. So it's something that is it's beautiful for me to work with, and that helps too. So I've started filming a lot of my work, and that's also become a really important part of the process. This is a still image from the paper making video that it's on my website with a lot of other process videos of this project. And I started focusing on video for accessibility, particularly during COVID, but it really is such a useful tool for anybody who can't be here in person for whatever reason. And also is another way for me to experience the project, videos and art, and looking at this process from that perspective has really added another dimension to my work. So I'm going to continue doing that. And I also am planning on doing a video walkthrough of this installation and posting that online for people who cannot visit it in person. So, I'm learning how to do video. So at the end of the second gallery space is the second poem, which I wrote after the first one, but not far after. Tell me about the space in your heart for ghosts. It is a place new to me. Do they speak to you with the full force of soul, or sometimes just an echo? Do you also wake in the darkness to find their presence a comfort, or sometimes tearing you apart? So surrounding that poem are little triangles of the handmade paper that are what was left after I cut circles out of the full sheet. And at first I was saving them because I was recycling the paper. So I would make my second batch out of the bits from the first batch as well as new pulp. But I kept saving them after I knew I didn't need more. And that's been sort of an interesting theme and sort of recurring theme of this project, and also some of the other work that I do is working with what's left behind. What we want to think of as maybe waste or unintentional, just leftover pieces, and that becomes the voice of the story. So this sort of free form placement of the triangles to me is sort of the disintegration and fragmentation of time and memory that I experienced since the beginning, but also looking into the future and thinking, what does this time look like for my grandparents? who are now no longer living. Like this very like structured experience of the moons. They're all the same circle. They're all like in lines as time progresses. And then, what happens after you die? Um, how does people who are still living, how does their experience of the people who are gone change and become less linear and more maybe fragmented, maybe just more organic? So that was where I was thinking about with the triangles. Something else I realized is that the structure of cutting out all the moons and counting them and quantifying that time was really important to me, especially early on, having some sort of a structure. And I think letting go of that and having space for, free flight. And I put those up on the wall, the triangles, just with little, there's sticky tack on the back of them. So I'm just sticking them to the wall where I wanted to. Into a shape that felt good. And that's such a different process than making the moons. And I don't think it's something I could have done a year ago. So this is very much, this exhibit is where I am right now. So this is 18 years, 20, or let's see, how many was it? 222 moons, 18 years. I took to Maine at an artist residency that I actually came back from 5 days before I installed this show. So yeah, it was a busy 6 weeks, but it was really just like, it was part of the same process, to be honest. And I had wanted to bring these back to my grandparents' home place since early on, and having the opportunity to do it was really amazing. It's a small rural island. This craft school happens to be 3 miles from their house. There's like one other place that I possibly could have stayed that's that close, but it was just it was such a privilege to be able to do that, right? Basically, in their forest, in their ocean, right where they were. And this, the video and the travel was actually partly funded by the Oregon Arts Commission. And that is something that I really, really appreciate, because this is not a really monetized project. And being able to focus on this and still pay my bills is really a gift. So this is a really rough, quick cut that I actually did in Maine. And I have a lot more footage, but this is just the first sort of thing I put together that I wanted to be able to share with people. So there's no transitions, there's no sound. That'll come later when I'm ready to do that work. And this was my original vision for this installation, was for it to be sort of a corridor of time that you can walk through and think about, like, this is 94 years of life as you are physically moving forward through space to move forward through the time as well. So this is 18 years, but it's a lot of moons. And this is at dawn, so the light is low. And dawn in Maine is like 4 o'clock in the morning. So that was an early morning. I'm not really a morning person, but it was worth it. I spent probably 3 hours with the installation just in the quiet of the morning. And it was a really, really peaceful experience. I really, really enjoyed it. So to me, this project and my memory of my grandparents is really centered on this place, and sort of the natural elements were so much a part of my memory of them and my experience of what we shared. So I've actually I did a bunch of other stuff at Haystack during this residency. I brought home some of the mud from the clam flats there. I'm probably going to soak some of the paper in it, so it'll dye some of the paper for the moons that I haven't made yet. I did some other work with the tree stumps and charcoal that were there. So it was a really sort of full of life experience. to be there, even though this project is about death. There was so much life in my experience of being there and doing this that was really healing to be a part of. So I had a local videographer do some of the filming of me in the forest and also in the ocean, which is coming up next. And that was really great too, to work with somebody who was from there, from their home place, and just have that um, connection continue forward. So I am not right at their house, but I'm basically as close as you can get public access. So this is very near where I would have been going swimming anyway. I used to go in the summers to their house. So these are all places that I remember. So, really quick, rough cut. There's a lot of cool footage that there maybe I would have cut in or made different choices, but I just wanted to get something put together. And I haven't even had a chance to go back and edit this. So I'm like, that was the right choice. Sometimes you just have to put out, what you can. And every time I see these videos that I screen during the presentations, I wish that there was audio. Although during a live presentation, I'm talking over it, so it's okay that there's not. But I have a lot of sound recording that I'm excited to work with, and I haven't done it yet, but that's fine. I'll get to it. So some of the other work I did in Maine was thinking about my identity as a Chinese American. I brought a book that my mother, who is Chinese, had given me a few years ago about our ethnic subgroup, Hakka Chinese people, their history. And my grandfather, who this project is about, my not Chinese grandfather, actually he was a university professor and he lectured in China basically my entire life. And there's a book published of his lectures that I had not read. It was one of the things I took home from their library after they passed. So I had that book and I had my own Chinese heritage book. And I was reading those, I was alternating chapters in Maine. And just thinking about, like where's my identity between all those personal connections and these place-based memories and all the branches of my family's history, thinking about just the context of what it means to be a Chinese person right now in America. Shifting balance in reading these two books between cultural exchange, imperialism, and colonialism. What does that mean for me? Both branches of my family's history. This is the first exhibit that I have presented in my entire career as an artist as Emily Jung Miller. Jung is my Chinese family name. And I've always just used Emily Miller in the past. And I think that claiming that part of my identity has been part of my process with this and part of my grieving process. And in some of the past presentations, I've talked about Chinese traditions of mourning, annual cycles that honor the dead. There's not just one, there's like an entire year cycle of traditions that they have, creating sort of space for that process of grief that we're missing in American culture. I did not grow up with those traditions. I researched them online in the past year, and that is why I know about them. So, for me to be here today and say I'm a Chinese person feels almost like dangerous and uncertain, and it's only something I've recently been able to do. My dad's white. Can I really be Chinese? And I wasn't taught Hakka to speak Hakka. My family did, my Chinese family does. I was not taught. Um, I didn't grow up with these festivals, so it almost feels like I'm appropriating my own culture. And just working through that this year has been really important. And I think part of it is because of the violence against Asians because of COVID, that it was an opportunity for me to stand up and say, like, I'm a Chinese person. Um, my mother's family were recent immigrants from China, and I think that that sort of downplay of ethnic heritage is something that I've seen in other families of recent immigrants as a survival tactic to avoid persecution. It wasn't safe to be Chinese, and I think it's sort of become more clear to me now that self-erasure is not safe either, and not really a path that I can choose. So the colors that I've used for this project are actually strongly related to Chinese color symbology. White is death. You wear white for mourning. And red is joy and life. So the thread being red and the moons being white. I didn't come at it from like, I want to make this Chinese color symbology, but I experimented with different colors of thread, and this is the one that felt right. So this picture is what happened after I floated all those moons in the ocean and hung them from trees in the forest. This is one of the knots. There were many, and I actually spent a very meditative day untangling them, most of them. I left one knot because it's part of the process, the knots. It's part of the physical process that these moons went through. They're still full of ocean salt, and this knot sort of reminds me of that I got to do that. But it's also, so it's a metaphor for everything isn't going to always be something that can be untangled. So the knots in this process that can't be smoothed out are something that with this in particular, I wanted to include and honor. That remains. That is part of the final show. And one of those sort of knots for me it's been really hard to give myself grace. Doing this project, doing this work requires my whole being to be present. And I need time before and time after to rest and reflect. And rest is not something that is prioritized, again, in our culture. And doing this project, being where I am, I don't feel like I have a choice. Rest is an integral part of life. It allows us to be fully present where we are. It allows us to grow in a way that is really difficult if we're always in survival mode and always under the threat of urgency and not having time to reflect on what has happened, where we are, what we think about it. Having that space for stillness gives us a chance to listen, that I think is really important moving forward in whatever way we do from all the places that we're at right now. This work can be exhausting, but I've tried really hard not to glorify our culture of exhaustion in the sense that it's valuable because I worked so hard, I was exhausted. I've tried really hard to say, like, this is important and I need to rest, and make that part of my public practice, not just something that I do on my own, but specifically something that I share as part of this is I'm going to need to rest. I have nothing on my schedule for the next 2 days except going to a lavender farm and doing yoga. That's it. There are absolutely things on my list that I could do in the next 2 days, but what I need to do is leave myself time, unstructured time. And, it's going to be more than 2 days. This project takes as long as it takes. I rest as long as I need to rest. And I really recognize my privilege in being able to do so. And I hope that this work begins to make use of that privilege that I have, that ability that I have to rest, um, for true growth that we can all share. Thank you. And thank you again for sitting through the beginning technical difficulties. So if anybody has any questions, the way that I've done this is it's sort of a traditional Q&A. The recording is still going. And then once all the official questions that you want recorded are done, I turn the recording off and it's just an open conversation. Was 10 years That is a good question. Was 18 years a significant number to have brought to Maine? Sort of, but not in a really deep way. I went to Maine throughout my adult life to visit my grandparents, but my like the way that I like printed on that place and on them was during my childhood. So I think just for that reason, it was, I mean, these are the moons of my grandmother's life, but it's also my experience of them in their life, especially because I haven't finished making all the moons yet. So I think there was that, just it was sort of like, this was my childhood, but it was also kind of like, this is how many I had in my suitcase. In all of the iterations of your installations, de-installations, what have you noticed that carries you forward to future activities that are being carried out? Thank you for, so what have I noticed most about perpetuating the project, like what's going to come next during the installations and de-installations? Particularly want to focus on the de-installation aspect. Normally when you take down a show, like that's the end, right? And it's just, you've just got to get it packed up. It goes a lot faster than putting the show up. It's just, everything's done now. It can be sort of a sad moment, but that has not been my experience at all with this. When I take these down, so this is the third one that I've done. First one in a gallery space where people could stand in it, but the other two were in window spaces. When I've taken these down, it's an opportunity for me to spend more time with it and see it again in a different way and work with it again. And that's been really interesting to me. It's like, it's another chance to be with the work, especially because I know that I'm going to keep working with it. But I think in a lot of my installations that, like in the work with ocean pollution that I do, it's the same, like it's a time for me to be with the work again. I think every time I've done it, I've had some sort of an idea of what that process gave me in my grief process, and also sort of ideas going forward for what I wanted to do next. The installation I did over winter 2021-22 was when I realized I really wanted to integrate video everywhere into this entire project. I took it down on the first anniversary of my grandmother's death. That's what I did that day. And I thought, do I really want to do this today? Because taking down an installation is sort of like the end traditionally, but I filmed the installation that day. So it really came to life in a different way than it had before that time. So every time I do it, I get like something more going forward. Just been cool. Thank you.
Curious to see what inspired you to go on this particular journey. Talk about the very part of the creation, how you decided to take this path.
Do you mean making the moons? Yeah. So I sort of skipped over that. I shortly after my grandmother died, it was January here in Oregon, usually very rainy. On the first full moon after she died, the sky was clear and I could see the full moon rise from my house. And I thought, this is the first full moon I've seen rise without her being able to see it too. And that just got me started thinking, like, how many full moons did we see together? How many did she see before I was born? How many did she see with my grandfather, with my dad? and like how, so I went and figured it out. And then just again had that thought of what does that look like once I had realized that there were 1175 full moons in her life. And I'm not really sure how I made the connection between the paper, cutting apart the paper that I had made, and making the moons. I think I was just looking for something to use, and I had that, and it was precious, and I didn't want to just like make it out of printer paper.
Can you talk about that moment in Troy, what that precious paper that you made in Hawaii, and by the way, where and like was it at a facility or your own county place? Somebody going, what was that moment like? Pour into your favorite.
Yeah, so I made the paper in Hawaii at a workshop, but a paper maker came and did just like a 3-day workshop. It was at Kauai Community College, but it wasn't a college class. It was just hosted there. So, and it was the paper maker was being hosted by one of my mentors in art, Carly Otsuda. So that was, yeah, the whole thing was just like a really good memory. And the moment when I decided that it was time to cut it apart, I actually took photos, high res photos of all the paper before I cut it. So I would have a record of it. And I think it really was something I needed to do. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like I need to tear something apart. It was my birthday a couple weeks after she died, and my partner got me a piñata, and I destroyed it, and that felt really good. And that's not something that I talk about a lot, but I think that is absolutely part of grief. And I think there's so many parts of grief that, they're not comfortable, they're not safe, they're not something that we have space to talk about. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with cutting apart paper or destroying a piñata. Like, that's literally what it's made for. But it still feels like something that it's not a part of yourself that's to be shared. And I think doing this project is like, no, I'm sharing this because people grieve, and it's hard to do it alone. You had a question in the back.
Yeah, just you were talking about your process, and you were talking about you had a kind of process.
Yeah, having that experience of letting the process sort of guide itself, and not really knowing what's going to come up next. I mean, I have like an overall idea, but leaving space is really important. I think particularly for this project, but for a lot of my work in general, I think some of the best ideas come out of that openness. And for this project, it's really what I need to do in order to grieve and heal, is to leave space for whatever comes up and be where I am, and see what pieces emerge and turn into something I didn't expect. Because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, in grief or really in this project. And I think that trusting that unknowing has been really important. So it was really fun to see it come together. It's like in the moment of like, oh, I have these triangles. Like, how is this going to look when I put it up on the giant wall? Oh, it looks cool. So yeah, having some aspect of play and enjoyment in this is definitely like, it's been a really good project for me from the beginning. Okay, you go first.
Oh, okay. So I'm really interested in how your exhibition can be presented in many different spaces. Like you hosted one outside, and now you're in this gallery. And I just wanted to learn how that has made you feel and what you've learned from like that transition from outside to inside and back and forth. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really love seeing this exhibition in different spaces, it really is a different exhibition depending on where it is. And that, like, sort of like trusting the process, right? I don't know what it's going to turn into until I get there and I see the light and, you know, the factors that are what's possible. And I think particularly putting this in public space has been important. So, you know, different public spaces. I have an exhibition coming up next year where it's going to be at the Hillsborough Civic Center. And I think that putting this in a government facility is going to be another really interesting statement that I'm actually really looking forward to exploring. But yeah, I really like that part of installation work, that it is so much about the site and the people who are there to experience it at, you know, wherever it is. Different people are going to be looking at it at an artist residency in rural Maine versus a gallery facility like this in Beaverton. And that's part of it too, is like, who gets to see it? Yes.
What I'm struck by listening to you is how pliant and amazing paper is, because you've been able to bring Maine and yourself and time and space and all sorts of things together in a medium that you can do something with. And I'm so glad that I've had a chance to hear you talk about it, because as a viewer, without a really big artist statement, I would have missed so much of the meaning behind your work and the healing and the process and all of those things. And we talk about this a lot of presenting your work and putting it out there and not getting a chance to explain yourself and not getting a chance to have this richer experience of understanding the whys and the wherefores. Ooh, look, that not happened. Now we know how that not happened. And so it's a special not.
Yeah.
You know. But I guess so my question would be, do you work in other mediums, or do you find anything as pliant as that paper is? Because it's amazing that you've got help from home in there.
Yeah, paper is amazing. I do work in a lot of other mediums. I love materials. So I work in a lot of different mediums, and I sometimes feel like if I was just a potter or just a paper maker, my life would be a lot easier, but that's just not me. So the paper really is amazing, and it's so easy. I mean, just get a blender. Don't use it for drinks ever again, but you know, just get a cheap blender and just shred up anything, and you know, get a window screen in a frame and just pull it through a bucket, and you've got paper. And you can put anything into it.
The artist statement and like artist talk thing is also like, I really want the work to be able to, I want people to be able to experience it without coming to the talk and get what they get out of it from my, you know, 3 paragraphs, which they may or may not read. But just the gist of it being that this is a space for people to experience their own histories and experience of time, not just my particular grandparent. And whatever they get out of it, what does not mean, or, you know, when is this poem written, it's really up to them. I'm not going to say me.
Emily, on tagging on to the question and comment from this guest, if you can talk a little bit about not only the relevance, but the importance, well, the meaning behind the shadows. Like, you and I spent a lot of time out there playing with them, moving them just slightly, the lighting. Like, can you share with everyone sort of that part of the process and what it means to you in that?
The shadows and the reflections also are, it's sort of, it's almost like a continuation of the moon. So like, how many are there really? Having the multiple shadows and multiple lights, and then reflections in the polished concrete, and also at night, the reflections in the window of the moon. It sort of duplicates them all, and I think that adds to my my experience or like what I want to share about like there are so many, like there's so many months in a lifetime. So it's more of the, I guess, the infinity of it, and like knowing that they're not real, like they're a reflection of the real thing, but they're still adding to the total experience in our visual understanding of it.
I just remember when I first saw the fact that you were telling time by moon, sort of pulled you out of your normal feeling of months and years, and actually made it more real because you actually, it wasn't something you could ignore, it was something you had to think about.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the way that I held on to time, was by like looking at the moon, what's it doing right now, where is it at in its phase, what time is it going to rise tonight, how much of it will I be able to see. It was something like in the physical world that was really grounding, and like, what day is it? I mean, that's literally become a joke during COVID times, right? Like nobody knows what day it is anymore. It means nothing. And I think I felt that so strongly after they died, that like our construct of time was just not available to me anymore. But the rhythms of the earth were right there. Yeah.
I can just pop into vision right there, the matrilinear aspect, and you're and it being an homage and fertile. Also the idea that you say that this isn't working, this whole way we're telling you how it's working, the way
Yeah, something you can always look at and reference.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know if it's Tuesday.
Yeah.
And like, is it really Tuesday? What does Tuesday mean?
You know, it lasts in 7 ways.
Yeah, it was something that was real and present. And it was something that we all experienced, you know, whether we're together or not, it's up there.
One of the matrilinear aspects, my grandmother's great. You know, can help think of that. Because she actually treats her everything matrilinear.
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe that the Chinese side of my family, Hakka Chinese in particular, is a matriarchal society. But again, I wasn't ready for that, so like I'm learning now. I'm grateful of the opportunity to learn. You know, I'll ask my mom questions and we sometimes she'll answer. But again, it's like that sort of self-erasure that like she doesn't want to talk about it too much. And I'm like, why not? I don't know any of these things, but I mean, I understand a little bit of why not, but it's not something that I experience.
How did you get the mud going?
Great question. I took it back to the artist residency in a bucket, and they have in the ceramic studios, they have a drying cabinet for drying ceramics. So I put the mud in the drying cabinet, and it was the last day, so everybody's ceramics were out of there, which I think everybody probably appreciated, even though they didn't know. It's clam flat. This mud has a lot of organic material. And by the next day, it was dry enough that I could double bag it into freezer gallon Ziploc and bring it. Actually, I did not bring it home in my suitcase. I shipped it home in a priority mail flat rate box.
I can't even imagine you trying to fly out of Logan with that. You're like, what?
Yeah, I had a suitcase full of fishing rope, my grandmother's sewing machine. Yeah, it's always fun, I'm sure, looking at night on the X-ray.